Good afternoon. Welcome to Voices at the Table, a community forum confronting racial and social injustice. I'm a little, gonna pull up my notes here from all the different screens I'm at, but I will continue to introduce myself in a moment. So I see that we have some local attending. I wanted to acknowledge that the Mayor of Boise, Gina Fulkerson, has registered for this, and also Council Member Christine Byrne, who I do believe is actually here. For those of you who are new to this table, my name is Sandra Organ Solis. I'm a Black woman who heralds from 2 native Texans, one of 7 children, raised Catholic in Omaha, Nebraska. I moved to Texas to become Houston Valley's first Black ballerina, and after 15 years founded a nonprofit dance ensemble in Houston, for which I was artistic and executive director, and have continued choreographing and teaching since moving to Central Texas 5 years ago, with my husband, Dr. Carlos Solis, a native Guatemalan who came to Rice University and now is at Texas State and serves as Associate Vice President of Technology Innovation Office. While we have mostly been received in Wimberley as a couple with kindness, warmth, and welcome, we have encountered some dynamics that have unsettled us, but especially in the last year. The year of 2020 brought the spring introduction of a pandemic. Then came the summer of social unrest brought forward by the murder of George Floyd and the outpouring into the streets for justice. It was on the activism and conscience of our young people to organize a vigil here and to bring to light injustices right here in Wimberley. Were you listening? Were you willing to raise your voices? Not until the incident with the Black family being harassed after dark with a threatening note did some of us even believe it could ever be here. Racism. Yet the fact is that no one was held accountable, or that Wimberley has its own sundown town reputation. We discussed this reality last month from the perspectives of members of the San Marcos Black community, Dr. Elvin Holt and Pastor Jonathan Banbury, both are on the call, I see, hello, and from Linda Allen's contextual history of this land and its settlers. You can go back and listen to the groundwork they laid for our discussions if you missed it. We also encourage you to watch a young person's investigation of race in Wimberley, Zora Schwab Stang's remarkable video called Don't Let the Sun Set on You. Bravo, Zora. We have also encouraged your preparation with interviews, excerpts, articles, and essays. Thank you for availing yourselves of this preparation for our discussion today and coming to the table to enter in and acknowledge some uncomfortable truths, often from voices silenced by fear, assimilation, or violence. Many who are now still absent, perhaps for some of those reasons. Please know that there will be further discussion of Latino, Asian, Indigenous peoples in future episodes, in case you think we are not covering all those who are or have been a part of this community we call Hays County, represented in this discourse thus far. Please be patient. The way we have set this table is to give voice to people of color priority, as it is their stories that are not often included in the making of our world, our nation, our state, our county. Please feel free to contact me about stories and people you know who might have something to add to this narrative of the place we call home. Encourage them to step forward. There is much we know, but much more we do not. We anticipate this to be a learning journey, and reflection and prompts between monthly calls may need a holding space. Again, check our website at tableyosoyx.net to find reading and watching lists, library book lists, and archived recordings of these discussions. Now for some table manners. These may be uncomfortable discussions and conversations to hear, and due to the sensitive nature of the topics, at times we ask that you please honor this listening space by staying muted. That being said, we welcome your use of the chat box. Memories will come to mind, thoughts will surface, realizations will dawn. Please place comments, questions, and brief descriptions of anecdotes you have in the chat box, where Lynn Flocky will monitor and at the appropriate time call you out of your muteness to speak. Please consider your use of language, that your words be respectful. No derogatory words, curses, or epithets will be tolerated. To spell this out, the N-word would be the preferred use of that particular term. Sensitivity, political correctness, also known as civility, is requested. We anticipate, okay, I think that's what I've already said. I want to thank, we anticipate this to be a learning journey and a reflection and prompts between monthly meetings calls for a holding space. Check out our website again. And thank you to the many of you who have reached out to me personally via email with your observations and experiences after the first panel. I welcome your feedback and stories. This being Black History Month, we've assembled those willing to share their experiences and stories as Black, Brown, and blended families from our communities. I've asked Marissa Thaler to help co-moderate, not just as a member of our community who is Black, but as someone who is raising a family here, which I have not. For some to speak, this is an act of bravery. For others, an opportunity for vulnerability, which is shared, not just for our benefit, but out of necessity. We need to know what it has been like for them and how we can do, speak, act, and advocate better. They are not here to name names and be dramatic or vindictive, but to speak their truths, tell their stories, and open up about both their shared and unique experiences. Please honor their dignity and transparency by listening closely and respectfully and framing your queries and comments with care. We hope all the things shared here will add to our collective understanding within its context of the past in order to engage with the present and to improve our shared future. I opened up last month's discussion with this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. People fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I also would like to begin with this additional quote from James Baldwin. You have to decide who you are and force the world to deal with you, not with its idea of you. With that, I introduce you to Marissa Thaler, who will tell you a bit more about herself and get things started with our panelists. Marissa, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm so glad that you're all joining us. Thank you so much, Sandra, for laying down the ground rules and getting things started today. My name is Marissa Thaler. I've lived in Wimberley for 7.5 years now and just celebrated my 9th anniversary working at a Wimberley business this month. I grew up in the military, living in Kentucky, Hawaii, and Ohio as a child, and then grew up mostly in San Antonio. I came to Hays County for college at Texas State University, then started spending time in Wimberley when I took my job in 2012. I have 2 children in elementary school at Wimberley ISD, and I am an active member of the San Marcos Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in San Marcos. I'll be chiming in along with the panelists a bit, but I want to get right into our questions. So let's welcome Dustin Adair, Claudia and Armando Perez, and their daughters, Gabby and Biba, Tara Racine, and Raul Bellau. And all are raising children of color in Wimberley. Talking about race, racism, and inequity is often uncomfortable. Identifying and unpacking our own identity groups and the different levels of privilege associated with them is even more uncomfortable. To engage in conversations about race and inequity in honest and meaningful ways, we've asked our participants to agree to experience some discomfort in talking about their families and children in a place that all of us love dearly, otherwise we wouldn't be here, but still have many experiences to share with you. And just a minute or so telling us about their families, just to get a baseline about who we have joining us, your kids, your ages, their grades, as much as you'd like to say. So we'll start with Dustin.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Dustin Adair. I actually grew up here in Wimberley. My family moved here in 1985. And so I went through my entire school here, or up until high school. Growing up queer in Wimberley was extremely difficult, and so as soon as I graduated from high school, I fled I fled and moved. Ended up in Kansas City, Missouri, where I had the wonderful opportunity to adopt 3 African American children out of foster care, and then after about a year of living there with them, we decided to move back to Wimberley to be close to family and to take advantage of the higher standard of education that Hayes County and Wimberley ISD offer, and the smallest of the community, and that sort of thing. And unfortunately, as you know necessitates this conversation, we've run up against a lot of racism since we've been back. We've been back about 2.5 years. So that's why I am on the call. Thank you, Marissa.
Claudia and Armando.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting us. It's really a privilege to be here with you guys today. My name is Claudia Perez. And I will let everybody to introduce themselves here, my beautiful family. I had an opportunity when Sandra called and invited us, to talk about our experience here in Wimberley. We moved about 8 years ago. So we've been living here for 8 years. I was honored. The first table, Voices on the Table, was incredible. I am so impressed by the caliber of conversations and so needed conversations that we ought to have. I am an immigrant. I am from Brazil, and I've been in the United States for 29 years. I started my life in the United States in Dallas. I finished my college in Brazil. I am a nurse. And I came here just to experience United States and experience education, and decided to stay. And now I have this beautiful family. So through, being here in Texas and Arizona, we made our way through Texas and found Wimberley to be a perfect spot to call home and raise the kids here and finish their school here. But while it was impressive for us to be in such a beautiful, touristic and artistic place, I did not expect it at all what we encounter on the school. We had friends, I think most of the people that are in the panel here, I call friends. We have met in one way or another. So there were great people that lives here, but there are experiences that, I'm glad that you're making and holding the space for us to share. So I am Claudia. Armando?
Hello, Marissa. Thank you for having this, you and Sandra. My name is Armando. I was born in Dallas. My parents are both immigrants, and my wife's an immigrant. But to be honest with you, being raised in Dallas, I never thought that I was a child of an immigrant. I just felt, American. I'm from Dallas, go Cowboys. I have great families. I graduated from North Texas in Denton. Met Claudia when she was visiting and studying. We get married, moved to Arizona, had a great 5 years there, moved to Kyle, and then we ended up in Wimberley. And we chose Wimberley for the same reason as many of you have. It's beautiful. And we heard that the schools were excellent. So we made it home here, and I've never experienced racism until I moved to Wimberley. So, we're here for the beauty, but I think there's something that we have to have this conversation in order to progress.
Okay. All right, so hi, I'm Gabby. I'm 19. I graduated from Wimberley High School last year. Right now I'm attending university at the University of Amsterdam. I just came back for winter break, which kind of got extended because of the whole flights getting canceled. But yeah, I'm happy to be here. I've been to Wimberley since I was in 5th grade when we moved. So I went all through junior high and high school, and I think it's really great that we're finally able to talk about a lot of the issues in the Wimberley school system, especially like when you're in it. It's such a, Wimberley is number one attitude, and people often fail to recognize the actual racism that students suffer every single day. And I think it's really important that we are finally opening up and talking about this.
I'll be super quick, but I'm Biba, and I actually just graduated high school last month, and I graduated from an online school because I left Wimberley High School 2 years ago.
Mhm.
2 years ago for, many reasons, but a lot of it was because of the racial issues that have been happening since the first month that we moved here from Kyle. And I never experienced any of that before. And I was 9 years old, so I never thought that, I didn't think about it. And then as soon as I moved to Wimberley, all of that started happening, and I had no idea what was going on. So I'm glad that we're all talking about this, because it, kind of pushed me out of Wimberley, the school district. So, and now I'm moving to Amsterdam with Gabby, and I'm excited to go because I love this place, and there's awesome people, but there's also a lot of difficult things that go on behind the scenes. So
Back to you, Marissa.
Thank you, Perez family. And Tara and Raul.
Okay, my name's Tara, and I am aware now that I grew up very white, very privileged in a small town in Northern California. I don't know if I'm supposed to be answering these questions about my exposure to racism and race growing up. I'll just throw this in here real quick. When I was 9, I noticed my cousin was darker skinned. It took me until I was about 9 or 10, and I had asked my parents, why does my cousin have dark skin? And my parents explained, my dad explained, because it was his sister who had adopted my cousin. And at the time, my dad told me my cousin was mulatto, meaning that he was half black, half white. And when he was born in the 60s, that was a difficult challenge for a single mom. That was my exposure, as well as whenever there were, I grew up in a small town very much like Wimberley, and it was predominantly white. But whenever my best friend in junior high was black, some of my best friends in the high school were Asian. One of my best friends in high school that's Asian, he took me to San Francisco with his family, and I remember being at 16 years old, the only white person at a dim sum on a Sunday morning. In a Chinese restaurant that had like 300 or maybe even up to 1,000 people. And I was literally the only white person at 16 years old. And I remember cognitively thinking about that feeling. My parents did emphasize, my mother was an immigrant. She's Dutch. And I had experiences where my grandmother would bring food to school for me, and they could not understand my grandmother's thick Dutch accent. And at that time, when I was 13, I didn't even know my grandmother had an accent. That was an awakening for me. That same grandmother would always make a rice table for me every year. And that was just celebrating the culture of Indonesia, because my mother, although she's Dutch, was born and raised in Indonesia. And so my grandmother would always celebrate that time in Indonesia by having a big rice table in which my grandmother would prepare for a week all of these different Indonesian foods. So I was throughout my childhood, diversity and ethnic differences were celebrated. My parents befriended a family that was Mexican. First, Efrain had come to this small town of Lakeport and was a hard worker, was a smart guy, and my dad recognized that. And my dad, had his own small business, would hire him. And over time, my dad ended up really appreciating Efrain, and we watched him bring his family to America. And in turn, my dad would sign the papers to help Efrain buy a house. So he was basically helping to finance write that off. So it was always, my upbringing was celebrating diversity. And it was a priority also. So we came to Wimberley. So we moved from California to Texas, and we chose Wimberley because of the school system and because of the artistic community. And it took a while to find friends, but we eventually found a group of friends and felt comfortable here with the friends. And sadly, as our kids grew in the school system, as everybody's saying, it got more difficult. So thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Marissa. Claudia emphasized that. So.
If you don't know us, we have 4 kids. We're on here because we have a multiracial adoptive family. Our oldest, Jasmine, is 18. If you've seen the video that Zora did, she's on there a good bit. She's good friends with Biba. Our next is 16, that's Kaya. Kaya is also African-American. Kaya has special needs, so she's at Wimberley ISD. Once COVID's over, she'll go back. And so she kind of has this mix of special needs and being a different race. Luna is Mexican descent, and she's 10 years old, so she's in 5th grade. She just moved to online school, mostly just because of COVID is the main reason right now. But we're pondering what to do for middle school with her. And then Malia's half black, half white. Both of her birth parents were half black, half white. And she's 6, so she's our precocious little 6-year-old. So.
And you're.
And
Tell them about you.
okay, I'm Raul. I grew up till I was 6 in Africa. Then we've lived in California until about 17 years ago. 18 years ago, we moved to Austin and then to Wimberley and started a family. Through adoption, all 4 of our kids were born here in Texas.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Let's talk about some of our earlier memories of race. It could be involving racism, but not necessarily. Tara mentioned some of her experiences in being able to celebrate culture. Or what are some memories or a quick memory that you have that still informs how you navigate race as a parent? And we'll start with Claudia.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you, Marissa. I coming from Brazil, what also had, similar history than United States. I did not realize racism there. One is it's very masked, I think, in our Brazilian society, to believe that we have a racial democracy. But when you come out of your bubble and start seeing that, there are racial issues, you start seeing, positions or professions or positions where you don't see a lot of African descendants in Brazil. Then I start realizing that, but only happened when I came here and start seeing differently. And I start realizing that I need to do some searching and to understand about racism more. Now, my whole experience arriving in the United States, I never experienced racism. I was very welcomed by everyone. People were very friendly. I didn't experience any of that until we moved to Wimberley. Then also, I think, this conversation is so important, as Sandra was mentioning, that in our awakening and what has been, a movement that we need to be talking more, I start realizing so many things that I did not know. I feel that it's important, to learn more about and listen more and asking more. So I started asking more for my kids, and asking them if they had experienced anything in school And you guys feel free to just chime in if you want, to talk about your experience. But I didn't realize racism. I think that's my main point until really on the awakening of what had happened on June, and I started being more in tune. I was like, oh, that's what happened to me here. What's that happened to my kids here was racism. I just thought that did not exist anymore. I just thought that it was like, we're way past that. We had the African president, African-American president. And, I just thought that it was part of the past and that there is like so much work in the future, that we're working to a better future, but we're not, we're really stuck. When we had the vigil for George Floyd that Biba and Tara's kid helped out, had people there yelling, that, why are you doing this? I could not believe that somebody that was there for the vigil did not understand how sad the situation was and how important it was for all of us to grieve and understand and move and what we can do to change this fabric of racism. And then I woke up, I was like, how can people not see what's happening? So anyway, I think that's been awakening, and I think I'm still working on it.
Yeah, for me growing up in Dallas, I think, maybe I was naive, but I had a really good childhood, a great childhood, supportive parents. I think it was the right time and the right city. I didn't feel that racial pressure. My school was pretty diverse. I have 3 brothers. We were all in high school at the same time. We're all pretty popular. We played sports. We're average looking guys. We don't, we had a lot of friends. So it was a really good experience. So fast forward 35, 40 years, my daughters, we were having a conversation about race in school, which was actually maybe 4 or 5 days ago. And I asked them a question based on Tara Rowe's daughter's, she spoke up at a school board meeting, and she said that she pretended to be white, or she wished she was white. And when Jasmine said that, it really broke my heart, right? So I'm asking my daughters about that moment, and they're like, yeah, we also felt the same. We all wanted to be white. And I had no idea until like 3 or 4 days ago that my girls, had those same feelings of wanting to be white because they didn't feel accepted as Gabi and Biba, which is really sad. But I think part of the growing process is having these types of conversations, because a lot of people in the community are just clueless, right? They just have no idea. And there are the mean people, the racist people. So I think we have to get the people who are clueless kind of on our side, at least to be made aware of what happens in our schools and in our society. So I guess in conclusion, the last 4 years during the Trump administration really just brought out all the hatred that people weren't shy about it. I was literally, I'm in my 50s and I was shocked. People who I had known since the girls were little kids, who I always thought were friends and cool people and nice people. I mean, I just saw them as mean racists. It was mind-blowing. Get back to you, Marissa. Oh, the girls? Y'all want to say anything?
I kind of wanted to add in that, I mean, obviously, like, kids are kids. Like Marissa, your little boys are so cute, and they just play with other kids, and they don't really think about, you don't think about a lot of like issues and, your skin color whenever you're younger, how your family looks. But when it really hit me was when I was 9 years old and we had just moved to Wimberley. I was in 4th grade, and I made some friends, and one of my friends, she asked me if I could spend the night at her, or it was, yeah, she asked if I could spend the night at her house, and I asked my parents, and then the next day at school I was like, oh, my parents said like, yeah, and then she was like, oh, my dad said that I'm not allowed to have any Mexicans inside of the house. And then I was like, oh, okay, because I didn't think anything of it. And then I told my parents, and they were like, what? Like, we've been in Wimberley for what, like 3 months? Like, and this happened, like you're 9 years old. And then ever since then, it kind of started escalating more and more, especially in 2016. And after that, like I was at a football game and I didn't even go to Wimberley. I was just going to support like, the football team to get out because I wasn't going to Wimberley. And there was a boy that I was walking on like the steps, and he was holding a big Trump flag, and he goes in my face and he screamed, "I hate Mexicans." And I started kind of having some anxiety and I had to leave, and I got scared. I was nervous. And ever since then, especially after Jasmine and I did the vigil and even the Juneteenth celebration that we had planned, after that, I have been very intensely bullied online, like very badly, and something that I never thought that I would ever go through. And I am kind of right now going through that little phase where all the time, I'm getting like attacked, very cyberbullied. So I think that that's something that, was really shocking to me, because I speak out and, finally be myself and I'm not trying to fit in, is like, I'm getting like I'm scared for me to be walking around in the store. Like, it scares me. So, yeah.
And let me add that the whole football incident was a week after the El Paso shootings. So that had just happened, and this guy's saying, "I hate Mexicans." It's a little freaky. It's an extra layer of fear that you shouldn't have,
I think for my experience, at least, I think it's just like a constant feeling of like being othered. Especially like if you think about it, like in my high school and middle school classes, I was most of the time the only person of color in any of my classes. And I think that really goes to prove a point is how the Wimberley ISD school district doesn't empower their students of color. And it's really sad to see that they all kind of shove them aside, especially with a lot of Hispanic students, is that they really try to push them aside and put them all in classes where they speak Spanish together. And, there's never any growing out of that. There's never any change from that. It's a lot of just like constantly like feeling othered, and a lot of, I would say I wouldn't say microaggressions, because I would just say aggressions. Like, it's just a lot of like blatant like rudeness and cruelness directly like to your face every single day. And you kind of have to just brush it off, because I mean, like, at least for my sister and I, it's kind of like, it's not worth it. We're going to be in this school for, 4 more years in high school. It's not worth it to stand up for yourself at every single little fight or little moment when you know that, even the administration isn't going to protect you, or it's really hard to go through school in Wimberley. It's definitely something that will probably like affect me for a very long time. And, whenever people are being rude or mean to you, it's not cool to have them in the back of your mind. Hey, do they just like hate me because, I'm not like white like them? And that's just always something you have to think about, which you shouldn't have to as like a kid, right? You should just get to go to school and like learn and have friends. But I don't know, we don't get to. Some people just don't get to.
Thank you, Perez family. And I neglected to mention to the audience, if you do have any questions, please go ahead and drop those into the chat, or we'll have time a little bit later on to ask a few questions of the panel. I'll give Dustin and Tara time to answer just a little bit of background on what is a powerful memory of race that informs how you're navigating race as a parent. Any memories of race that aren't necessarily racism, but just from your past. Tara and Raul.
I feel like I answered that a lot. It was a lot of the childhood memories. In my ignorance, I guess one thing I really think that's important is for everybody here to know is that in my white privilege, I'm constantly learning, and in that process, I'm constantly making mistakes, like every day, all the time to today. So when we moved to Wimberley, I noticed, because I was skeptical coming from California, I had heard of how racist Texas is. So I was quite skeptical being here. Our family was concerned about our children. And I felt supported for probably the first decade. And I felt the way I described it was there was an undercurrent of racism clearly here. Now I know better terminology is they were probably microaggressions, small things. One of them being an adoptive family is this is pretty common, and this was in that, oh no, it was on something else, but in transracial adoption, when there are white parents and children of color, people will come to us either because they're religious or just because they think we are saving children who are colored, which is repulsive to Raul and I, and it's a problem, and it continues to happen all the time. And we're very clear to nip that in the bud immediately, that we are feeling very grateful to have a family because we always wanted to have a family. That's something that comes up a lot. And also there were just a lot of small things that were coming. I'm not going to go through the list. And things turned, they just flipped upside down 4 years ago. Because words matter, leadership matters. And when we have the highest leader in the country being outspoken racist, people in the country who have been politically correct and quiet suddenly were becoming outspoken racists. And suddenly things became very difficult for our children. And literally the day after the election, my oldest, who loves school, loves people, loved being at school, called me and said, I want to go home, which was never, ever something she had ever done before. So that kind of just flipped our world upside down, was to see the switch, it was like a switch that went off within Wimberley. It was just sudden. That was my perspective as a parent. I do realize my daughter was keeping things from me because I'm pretty proactive and outspoken if I need to be. I'm not going to hold back for the sake of my children. So I hope that kind of answered that, Marissa. Do you want to add anything?
I don't think I have anything specific to add. I would definitely agree. After Trump was elected, all the racists suddenly decided they could be bold and loud about it. Before we would kind of need to lean on other friends that were African American to kind of say, hey, do you get a racist vibe from anybody? Because we couldn't get it. We didn't have that, same experience when it was kind of an undercurrent. But, kind of like what Armando was saying, it became very obvious after, Trump was elected, because people would start posting Confederate flags on their Facebook or whatever they were doing, right? And go, wow, okay, that person's super racist, right? And so that was definitely a turning point for us. I'm hoping I've gotten a new, a new appreciation for, trying to get the racism and the racist people to be ashamed of themselves and not so outspoken. If nothing else, maybe it'll help their kids or their grandkids to be less racist than they are, and we make some progress that way, right? Rather than they feel like, oh, I'm entitled to this loud opinion that's just awful. Right? So the one other one I can kind of remember is I remember Jasmine coming home in 7th grade. This was before the election, but when they do history and they talk about, at the time, I think they were talking about the compromise, the 3/5 compromise, where in U.S. history, they decided a Black African American person was 3/5 of a person. she just felt very on the spot and very embarrassed because as they were talking about it, thankfully, like the one other person of color in the room was the teacher, but all the students she felt like were just staring at her the whole lesson, and she just kind of really felt singled out on that and talked about that for a bit. So that's kind of the other, I guess, areas, we talk about history and things like that, trying to figure out, how do you tell the history, and, forums like this help tell everyone's history, which is good. Thank you, Marissa.
Thank you. And Dustin, would you like to add anything? Any experiences from childhood?
Well, it feels kind of weird to be one of the only people, like the only person on the panel who grew up here, because I was thinking about this when I got these questions, and honestly, I don't remember any time where race was an issue in Wimberley as a child, because there were no Black people here. There was one Black kid. He wasn't a friend of mine. That's how it was. Like, oh, there's one Black kid here. Do you know him? Not really. And then, the Latinx students that lived here all kind of stayed to themselves. So so you didn't even really interact with any kids of color. There were no people of Asian descent here. There, like I said, there was one Black family here. I don't know if they continue to live here or not after their kids have graduated. So I didn't really even start understanding and opening up to racial difference until I was in college, when I went to St. Louis to go to college. And that's when I met, my first Black friend. And that's my best friend to this day. His family is from Iraq. And I can't even describe to you what it was like to tell my family that I had met a Iraqi family and was friends with their son. And I was spending Thanksgiving with them. It was like, do they even celebrate Thanksgiving? Yeah, they've been in this country for, 30 years. So I had a lot of shock about that, like realizing how little information and how little education I had as I became an adult. I didn't have any of that happen to me as a child at all. So, I hope that answers that question, Marissa.
Thanks, Dustin. I liked that.
Hey, Marissa, I just wanted to add something in. I actually went online in the Wimberley ISD website, not updated since 2018 to 19, and it said the demographics of 2,490 students, 17 were African American, 16 were Native American, 10 were Asian, 618 Hispanic, and 1,767 white. And those of two or more races, there were 62 students. Of 175 teachers, 8 were Hispanic and 166 were white. So I was surprised, although this was from school year 18-19, 2018-19, to hear that there was a Black teacher. Good, great. I'm glad to hear that. So, anyway, I think representation matters at school level too, to see somebody that looks like you, be an advocate for you. But I think when people don't realize there's a lot of the prejudice that happens to our community here in the schools, there's a lot that happens to children of color, especially probably the Latinos. But there's more of them actually than there are of any the other minorities. So that was just something I wanted to add in.
Thanks, Sandra. And I put those demographics in the chat so you guys can see those as well. So our next question will bring us a bit to the present. So in what ways do we see our community members agree or disagree about the nature of racial problems, what caused them, and how serious they are? what concerns do you have about engaging in these difficult conversations in our community, whether it is about race, politics, religion, sex, gender, those things? Let's start with Raul and Tara. You want to go first, Raul?
You know, the most stark disagreements I've seen are when at school board meetings, and you know, you'll have a student kind of standing up and just speaking to the board honestly, or a parent talking about their experiences and asking for change. And you know, it may be around race, like with our kids. It might also be around the LGBTQ community, asking to not be bullied, right? And as they speak to their experiences and tell their truth, just hearing half the people out in the audience just deny it. Oh, that never happened. Oh, they're lying. Oh, that can't be true. Oh, no, they're just standing up there lying. Like, why would this kid, you know, stand up and speak to the school board and tell a lie like that, right? But just the complete denial, right? I tell you, that is hard to figure out. How do you get past that, right? And I think, you know, maybe these are just the hardcore people that you're not going to reach real well, but you kind of have to figure out how to reach people that are just don't realize it's happening, but aren't just going to deny it when they hear a 16 or 17-year-old student speaking their truth, right? So that's kind of the areas of real disagreement. I think that kind of, you know, I think letting our young people stand up and speak and then amplifying their voices is really helpful. Things like this are helpful. You know, with the support, you know, the support that we saw at the Juneteenth and the support that we saw at the George Floyd thing was wonderful, and it was overwhelming. You know, I think our kids really did feel well supported and felt like, okay, there's hundreds of allies here in this town that are supporting us. You know, it's not just the mean people that go out of their way to be mean to us. Right? Thanks.
Tara, did you want to add anything?
I guess the question being, I don't hesitate to have the conversation at all. But this is maybe the first time there's been a conversation. However, I think the conversation needs to be with people who aren't here. They're the people who need to be listening and don't seem to care. And it has really been really frustrating the last 5 years being a parent. And so I won't hesitate. I've been feeling pretty angry and it's pretty emotional because I care and love my children. And it feels like a big mistake raising my kids in color here in Wimberley. And thank you for listening. And this is about our children, and this is about repairing race relations. And I just realized these are why women cheers. So sorry. The point is, we need to have conversations, but the people who need to hear it are not here. And sadly, most of those people are those in charge of the school district. And it's getting worse. It's not getting better. So thanks, Marissa.
Thank you, family. Dustin, how do we see members of the community agree or disagree on the causes and problems, and what concerns do you have about the difficult conversations?
Well, one of the first things that I noticed when I moved back and my kids started going to school here is my oldest would come home and she would say, we at the time, since we had just moved 600 miles, we were living with my parents who have lived here, like I said, since the 80s. And I would say, she'd come home and she'd say, this thing happened today. And I would be like, well, that's super racist. And my parents would both be like, no, you're just reading things into it. You're adding on extra layers that aren't there or whatever. Like almost immediately like trying to negate what my kid was saying about her experience. Or I would say something like, hey, did you see so-and-so? Isn't that weird? Did you see this on Facebook? That's weirdly racist. And they'd be like, well, that's not what they meant. And it became really clear to me that there was a lot of denial, even by people who would tout not being not having racist thoughts. They are so entrenched in the community that there's a lot of denial going on there. And I've been doing a lot of research myself over the last couple of years, and one of the things that really struck me was the idea that because we grow up in an American society and in just society in general, we all are infected with racism. And we have to acknowledge that, yes, I have racist thoughts and do racist things, even though I am a parent of African-American kids and am friends with people of different races. And I need to work on that just the same way anyone else does. But the blinders that go on in a community like Wimberley are really kind of shocking sometimes. I think does that work? I'm so sorry that I ramble. Thank you, Marissa.
It's just fine, Dustin, really. Someone said in the chat how valuable your perspective is. It's great. No pressure at all. Let's let the Perez family answer this question, and then we'll stop for some audience questions, take a few minutes. I see a couple in the chat, and Lynn will help guide us through that. Perez family, agreeing in how our community agrees and disagrees, and any concerns about discussing.
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you. And I think it's kind of like you think that you start with one thing, and then, as Armando was saying a week ago, because you and Sandra start this conversation with us and start digging, other things came out that we never knew before, right? But I think in my experience here, the first thing that I saw, I think we all want to raise strong kids, right? So I feel that Armando and I raised strong girls. And one thing that we always told them is, stand up for you and for your friends. And what happened a lot to them here in Wimberley is that they had to stand up for, other people, other Hispanics or other people of color, or, the LGBTQ community. So, and when they would come back home and tell me the stories, protecting some of their friends, and it was just, wow, I couldn't believe it, right? That was actually happening. But again, I did not know that it was happening to them also, right? As we just mentioned. But the first time that I really experienced was after the Pride Parade, our first Pride Parade. And I thought that was really, really important. And it was a beautiful night. It was such a celebration of inclusion. And then after that is when I really start realizing how much it's wrong, and the community, and people are saying, we already have a perfect city, why you're stirring up things? and then I'm thinking, I was like, wow, you have no clue, do you? You have no idea that people are called racial, derogatory things, and when they go to the grocery store, when they go to the gas station, when they go to school, they had no idea that was happening. So I think my first entrance was truly, after the Pride Parade that happened. But you might say, I was like, what? When your kid wasn't invited for a sleepover, because she's a Mexican descendant, you did not realize? I thought that it was the only one. I was like, that guy's a dinosaur. He's in extinction, and that, wow, I thought it was that, but when we had this conversation with the girls about a week ago, Biba was saying that they were her first year on fourth grade. The teacher was trying to put her on ESL. Well, she was born here. Her first language is English. She doesn't speak Spanish, but she was pushing her and forcing her. It's like, oh, don't you want to go to that class? Or, trying to pigeonhole. And I thought that it was interesting what Gabi just said here right now. It's like, well, I was the only one in advanced classes because they're trying to put all the Spanish last names, it's not even Spanish speaking, all together. So I think that was my first, experience.
I don't even know where we're at now, but as far as the school district, I think obviously it's a top-down problem. Okay, I mean, we have to keep it real, and I'm not even sure if there's anybody from the school board on, but I hope they are, right? If they care, they're on. If they don't care, they're not on, because I think they were invited. But I'm not going to name names, but it's from the top all the way down. Kids, there are kids who find allies in teachers, who've gone to teachers asking for help, begging for help. And some of these allies are literally tell these kids, I cannot get involved because I want my contract renewed. They're afraid. And then you have these other teachers who are, maybe bigots, racists, who they feel emboldened. And they help, they light the fire. It allows other kids to terrorize some of our kids of color, some of the kids in the LGBT community, whatever, it's top down. So we just have to be real about where the problem lies. And I think there are 49 participants on this call. I think some of these people, I hope, will run for school board in the future, right? I mean, if we don't run, then we don't have a shot, right? We're not going to see any changes until decent, people are on the school board. I don't care what party, but just decent people who care about children's lives, because that's really what we're talking about, the safety of children. And hopefully it's the inclusion and the love and everything else. But right now I'm just wanting a school board who protects these kids, because a lot of kids, they don't feel safe going to school. And it's shameful. So I hope more people run for school board. And then as far as the community goes, I think we have the bigots, we have the racists, they're there. But there are a lot of people, as Dustin mentioned, or Raul, and they're just clueless. That's the privilege of being a white Christian in America, especially here in a small rural community where you're good folk, good people, but you have no clue what really happens, right? I mean, your little bubble is what you experience and what your child experiences, and you just assume that every child has the same type of protection and attention. But I think a lot of people are clueless. So I'm hoping these conversations that we're having now continue with people in some of these churches, right? I mean, church people that have no clue what's going on. And I think little by little, we can move the dial a little bit, maybe not all at once, but we can go from empty to a quarter full, right? And this is why I'm excited about what you guys are doing, because just bringing attention is really important. Back to you.
Thank you. Dustin, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to somebody had said something earlier about their child being invited to a sleepover and then having that retracted. That exact thing, same thing happened to my oldest daughter within about 3 months of living here. A child invited her to spend the night, and I said, okay, we'll get her parents' number so I can call them and get them get the information, get it all set up. And the next day she said no. She said I can't spend the night again. So this is not something, that particular thing is not something that has gone away.
And we're all laying the groundwork for my 7 and 5-year-old to not have to deal with the same things. So let's go ahead and open up to any questions. Lynn, will you go ahead and check the chat for that? I know we've kind of been talking it out. It's been a great chat conversation as well.
Yeah, it's an amazing chat conversation going on, and I'm trying to figure out the questions. Maybe one real concrete question that Susan Cook asked, or you should ask it, Susan, about the age of the people doing the yelling. That might be a good one to start with. Unmute yourself, Susan.
Yeah, I was just wondering who the people were, like who gave y'all grief when you were doing your Juneteenth or George Floyd actions. Like, was it teenagers in pickup trucks? Was it grown-ups? Was it men? Was it women? I mean, who were these people?
All of the above. All of the above.
Really?
Store owners, owners of stores standing outside their stores shouting.
Really? Wow.
Some group, like there's like one group.
I'm so embarrassed.
Mhm.
And let me tell you, there were a lot of church people out there yelling and screaming too.
My mother.
Yeah, I mean,
had-
I don't go to church, but it is my understanding that most of the churches that I've ever been involved with had, very lily white congregations. I don't know if that's totally the case, because I stay away from those kind of spots.
I don't go to church either, but I hear there are some wonderful churches in the community, for example, where Marissa worships in San Marcos and the Unity Church in Wimberley. So there are, friendly, godly places that I'm aware of, but I do not attend church myself.
We really have been trying to reach out to the churches, the faith leaders in the Ministerial Alliance to attend these meetings as well, and to be involved in these discussions, just so you know, as well as all the elected officials and the superintendent and the school board. So exactly what you were saying, Tara, about that the people that you need to hear these conversations aren't here. Well, some people know those people that are here. So some people on this call know some of those people, and I would encourage you to invite them to come back and listen to these discussions, especially if they're public servants that we've elected. They need to know what's going on. So I would just encourage that.
And this brings us really to a good question that Brandon Beck asked, Dr. Brandon Beck, about, Brandon, would you ask your question about how Wimberley might be divided?
Sure. I'm curious. I don't live in Wimberley anymore, but when I did, it was pretty clear that people in Wimberley were divided based on church affiliation, and their politics and human dignity practices followed exactly with which church they belonged to. And I was curious how much that is still the case. For example, Cypress Creek people behaved based on Cypress Creek beliefs. First Baptist people behaved based on First Baptist beliefs. Methodists behaved in Methodist ways, Catholics in Catholic ways. And the whole politics of schools and community activities followed exactly in those cliques of religion. And I was just curious how much that is still evidenced in things like shouting at the Pride Parade, shouting at Juneteenth, behavior in the kids in the schools.
I'm not sure. I attend the UU in San Marcos. I do know, I guess, anecdotally, the church's youth groups are a very big social club in as always. But I've heard from students that it can be difficult to engage in social activities if you're not involved in a church, or if you're not going to be at the lock-in and the Wednesday night and the Sunday. So that's a pretty common church problem.
Yeah, I would say that I don't know either, but I would say that, the love the neighbor and help each other. You know, whenever we just had moved here, the flood happened and everybody jumped in and helped. It was beautiful. I really felt a sense of community. But soon after that, you know, uninvited from sleepovers or, you know, the microaggressions, then you start seeing, and then as we're saying, people feel empowered to be more vocal and really, you know, not care if they were offended or not. That's being the reality. And it's unfortunate, you know, because, you know, anyway, it's just unfortunate that the inclusivity is not here. And it's funny enough, is in the first 3 months, right? They try to find a way to get you out of this community. And I know a couple of friends that actually recluded. They're, you know, I think they were even invited to be here, you know, and they just were not re-engaged. I mean, the oppression is real and the aggressiveness is real. And, you know, and it's almost like I'm not doing anything wrong. So why am I gonna, again, fight for being here? You know, it's not their problem, right? It's the other people's problem, but of course they're not seeing it, right? So it's that thing, you know, so it's very interesting that it is right at the beginning, the first 3 months or 6 months that are here, they try to get you out as fast as possible.
And to answer Dr. Beck, I don't know either. I do not I'm home church. This is my church right here. But I know there's certain cultures based on which church you attend. Some are more godly and friendly than others. That's definitely true. Back to you.
Well, we actually have some church type, well, people who lead in churches here. And they've even ventured into the chat room a little bit. So I might call on them. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but Sandy Londa is a reverend, and she made sort of a stark comment. And I don't know if you want to turn that into a question or just make your stark comment, Sandy, wherever you are.
Well, the fact of the matter is that even within the churches, there are divisions. Not everybody's on the same page. So, you know, we've got red and blue pews in some churches. And that's really a fact.
And Kit Holmes, I know you are now a reverend at Unity. So maybe
Yes,
you say something.
that's true. I agree with Sandra. There are divisions within the Unity, within the what's called the New Thought community. And yes, Wes Kane, there you are. It is heartbreaking. And we tend to think, I will speak for myself as a minister, that what we teach and what we practice, we think people are getting it. We think that there's, you know, they show up, you know, and then you find out that their politics are very opposed to all of the things it seems that we teach. And it is frustrating. And yes, it is heartbreaking. And we do what we can. And I will speak to, there was some conversation earlier, why churches don't take more of a stand. Part of that has to do with adhering to being a nonprofit and not getting overtly political, although we know, I personally know that there are other congregations in this town that are overtly political, and it doesn't seem to affect their 501c3. We, on the other hand, like to take the high road and stay in integrity and stay within what we know we signed up for. But we also take the issues from the human standpoint. And I did put in the chat that when we found out in 2019 that there was going to be a Pride parade, my wife and I said, we're doing this. And we had nearly half of our congregation show up to march or to support in that Pride parade. And it was the most incredible feeling to see that kind of support, because the majority of our congregation is straight. And it was, and with kids and the whole thing. And I know that they caught grief as well for, why are you exposing your children to this kind of thing? And it was, there was some ugliness, but all in all, it was a beautiful celebration. And we participated in the virtual one this past year as best we could as well. But that's what I've got for the moment. So thanks for letting me share. I appreciate that, Lynn.
Why don't you unmute Wes and have something to say there?
Yeah, Wes King.
I am happy to unmute and talk, but I'm going to have to move out into a different room where my kids are not watching Frozen. So I wanted to answer a specific question that was asked in the chat that I think is something that I'm really struggling with and trying to figure out how we answer appropriately in our extremely white church here at the Methodist Church here in town. Because the truth is that, we are very segregated by color. I can count on one hand the number of racial minorities that we have in our church. And it's sad, it really is. It takes a very long time to change this. It takes a very long time for us to prove to a community that we are welcoming and we are inclusive, and we're not going to put up with the crap that our church has stood for so long. But it does take time. So the question of, aren't the majority of churches in town predominantly white? It's absolutely true, and it's heartbreaking.
Well, so is the population. So you really have nobody to practice on. It's what I think about racism in this town. It's just that you don't have many people to practice on, but the ones that are here are feeling it, but nobody's asking them to speak up about it. But we are very much, we're some of the people he can count on one hand, my husband and I in the Methodist Church. But, we've been when we came here, we went to various churches, and there was definitely a political tenor to each one of them. And so we chose the one where we felt most loved, most welcomed. And that was at the Methodist Church, but there were other options, I guess, in that regard. But this is what we settled on. But thank you for, and also I want to just give some props to Wes for the fact that he sponsored the Stamped from the beginning Ibram X. Kendi book group with, opened it up to the community after the whole thing, all the unrest and the vigil this summer. And there were community members. I don't know how many people were in those calls, but many of you are in the room today. But again, this might be preaching to the choir a little bit, these voices at the table, but we're hoping that they're gonna start hearing about these discussions, the whole community be involved and get a little bit more better informed. Marissa? Lynn?
Well, let's see. We got a lot of other very good questions. Susan Raybuck had a good point about bullying, and I thought maybe she could ask her question.
Sure. So I had the experience a few years ago after Trump was elected of volunteering to help out certain days of the week out at Camp Good Sam Wimberley, which is a summer program for at-risk youth. It's got a lot of Hispanic kids who fit in that category. Probably poverty is a factor of how they select, I think, as well as other things like grades and such. There was a great deal of mean behavior on the playgrounds in particular, and in the hallways where, not within the earshot of the teacher, or actually none of them were teachers. They were all aides and such, but the kids were told repeatedly that the Hispanic ones were told that they need to get out of here and go back to Mexico. And I would let people know what had happened, and they always tried to address it, but it just didn't seem like it was effective at all. And I don't know what is being done in the schools, if anything, as a system-wide thing to address bullying. And I hope some of you might know that the answer to that question.
They created a super cute logo. That was it. It was "Dude, be nice" or something, but that was it. Nothing else. Okay, back to you.
Well, they have a logo. They have anonymous phone line that you can call in and tell us stuff. But from my experience is that they're very selective. What kind of stories they pick up from that phone call. And they can do pretty amazing things with things that are very not important, and do nothing for things that are life-threatening. Do nothing. Like somebody threatened somebody's life on social media, and they said, oh, there's nothing that we can do. And things that are like, why you're spending thousands of dollars in this lawsuit that is nonsense, or any other things that they spend time on, that nobody's life is at risk. So I think if you ask if they're doing stuff, they might say that they are. If it is being effective, how they're measuring the quality of those things is another thing. So, there is one more thing that they started before COVID, which was wellness, that you could just go to this place where you're going to feel safe, that you can talk to somebody in there. But, it's, yeah, we need people in the school board. I think bottom line is we need people in the school board that actually understands that this is a threat for their mental health, for their safety, for inclusion, for achievement, for academics, for all the above.
Well, we have about 14 minutes left, so we'll go ahead and stop the community questions. But I think let's take Susan's question about basically what happens when you say something. And Claudia and Armando spoke a little bit about that. Will you expand into what you would like to see happen, what your expectations are of a district that is supportive, and, think community-wide as well. If we had excellent race relations, what would that look like here to you?
Well, I think, Marissa, it all boils down to caring, right? If the leadership at the school district cared about some of these disadvantaged groups, I think they would obviously react. But when the leadership doesn't care, and I'm not here being, pointing fingers, but that's just a reality. We have a culture of hatred, of bigotry and racism. And, they put on a good show, we're anti-bullying, blah, 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 but it's just a show. That's it. They literally do not do anything because they do not want to do anything, right? A good example is that P13, or the system where you can leave a message and an anonymous system. There was a kid in the LGBT community who was getting bullied, death threats. He was being terrorized. And my daughter and some of her friends went to speak to the principal. They did nothing. Claudia and I went and spoke on behalf of this kid with the principal and the superintendent, and they literally said, well, there's really nothing we can do because it's online. It's not related to school issues. Fast forward 6 months, my daughter goes to a party where they were serving out. We knew she was going. She asked if she could go. We gave her permission. Somebody called that anonymous line saying there was alcohol at a party, and they named students who were there. Well, they pulled out my daughter out of class, asking her about this party that she attended. And again, my perspective is it was just for show. Like, yeah, we care. But whenever a gay kid is getting terrorized, they literally said there's nothing we can do because it has nothing to do with school. So again, they're picking and choosing, when to care. So I think the reality is we have to have a school board and a superintendent who cares. That's bottom line. Okay, back to you.
Well, I would like to add, what I would like to see, it's more celebration and inclusion of different races and and culture. I think the celebrations and cultures that they have, it's, oh my gosh, that's not the right ones, the parties that they have, or, I think it's truly about empathy. Let me learn about your culture. Let me, let that be your time to shine. Be your time to shine. Let every kid shine, and just celebrating the differences and seeing how we can be stronger together. But instead, what it's happening is they're excluded. They, other kids can be mean to them. There is no accountability to what happened. And many of them just leave, right? That's why you never seen, anyone of color in school. It happens that now we have a growing, perhaps, Hispanic community here, and you see more kids. But again, instead of celebrating them, they're taking them out, right? And putting them in this other category. And where's the celebration and inclusion of their culture, or any culture? We're a multicultural society. It's just, it's not like, oh, Michael, it's anyone, and just truly learn history as history happened. And, that's what I want to see. I think more celebrations of real history, the real history, not the pretend history that you want kids to believe, or, and so anyway, that's what I wanted to see, more inclusion and celebration.
Thank you, Claudia. Yeah, I even see this as of last year in the elementary schools. We go in to register the kids for pre-K or kindergarten. You go in and do all the paperwork, and there's a line for everybody else, for everybody. There's a line for Spanish speaking families, and we literally go into separate rooms. We, anytime there's an event like a literacy night, we're separated physically. They go to a room and go listen in Spanish, and I understand what they feel is giving people who speak Spanish the materials in their language, but it's so awkward. And, we have maybe 2 or 3 minutes to get to know these families if we happen to be in a group setting, and then they're gone. And so, yeah, there's very little attempt at bringing in that authenticity and the celebration. Dustin, yeah, I guess we'll consider this our last question. What happens when you go in and report a problem, and what would you like to happen? What would you like to see going forward?
Well, I have had it. My oldest is in 8th grade, and then I have a 7th grader, and then I have a 3rd grader. And for a long time, my oldest, who has the primary issue at school, would not tell me any of the names, because any of the people that were bothering her, because the problem is, if she reports it, then those kids then feel like, oh, she's a snitch. She's got to, we've got to teach her, that you don't snitch, even if you're being harassed. And so I would, try and express to, the principal that, this was happening, these things were happening. And again, like you said, there's nothing we can do about it. If she won't tell us who it is, there's nothing we can do about it. Well, at the beginning of this year, she messed up and said the kid's name, one of the kids' names. And so I called the principal and I told, this is the kid. And of course, they brought that kid in. And then the next day it was harassed way worse. And so it's the issue is, we can report all we want. That's not going to change the way that the kids act. I've essentially come to the point now where it's like, okay, you got to tell the teacher when you're being harassed. You got to tell the principal, so that when it comes to a physical altercation, not if, when it becomes a physical altercation, I have the footing to go to the principal and say, well, they've been telling me this stuff, and I know that they've been telling you because I made them tell you. So, well, here we are. Here we stand. That it came down to a physical altercation because she had no other choice but to protect herself physically. And there's such a like, and it's almost she would say things to me like, oh, well, I can't say anything about this kid because I don't want to ruin his football career. I don't want to mess up his athletics. And it's like, how is some other kid's extracurriculars more important than her safety? And that really is something that has been upsetting for me for a while now. So, okay. Thank you.
Dustin. Tara and Racine, you guys talked a little bit about what happens when you report, and if you want to say more on that. And then what would you guys like to see? How should we be doing this? Well, how should the schools and the community be doing this?
Well, let's see. I think that, yeah, when something's reported, I think, clearly there needs to be kind of some thought about how to have accountability with social media, right? With hate speech and bullying on social media. That's definitely something I think the school needs to figure out how to navigate and have a policy towards and hold people accountable. Clearly you do see favoritism within the school, and I think that people should be treated equally, not with favoritism, right? And it is tending towards favoritism towards, I think, people that are very athletic, right? As you kind of saying, into football or into volleyball or whatever. But even within that, right, there'll be favoritism among coaches. But I think with kids, they need to set the example and hold them accountable. And if some of these bullies need to have in-school suspension for a week or two, whatever they need to do, right? They kind of, they have no problem figuring out how to go punish kids that are different, right? But wealthy white Christian kids, wealthy white straight Christian kids rarely get any punishment, right? And hey, treat everybody equally, apply the same accountability to everyone, right? And so to me, what I think success looks like is, we get to be so diverse that it's not a big deal, right? And that's with race, that's with religions, that's with cultures. The quote that Sandra shared about fearing what you don't know. Well, if it was very diverse and we had this wonderful multiracial, very kind of diverse in thought and all these other ways, society, and that's the way the community was, I think then there's less chance for fear. These stories, there's a couple stories here, right, where somebody's invited for a sleepover and then it gets rescinded, right? We had a similar thing where our oldest wanted to go over there, was invited over there. We wouldn't let her, right? Because we knew the way the parents thought and we didn't feel she was safe there, right? Yeah, that was 5 years later on, right? And so, but it does point to some seeds of hope that these kids that are inviting them, they don't know their parents were racist, right? Maybe that's how they found out they had racist parents, right? Is when their parents said, no, so-and-so can't sleep over here. They didn't do it to be mean. They wanted to invite somebody over, right? And so to me, those things, hopefully when those kids, are growing up and having kids of their own, they're not subjecting their kids to the same racism and bigotry. Thank you, Marissa.
Thanks all. And just my little thought on that. What does it look like? I like what you said, Raul, about, it just being so normal and so natural of celebrating cultures, whether there's 2 Black families or 100, just being able to do our own work as adults and prepare our children for this. So much of it is from history and people being able to deny things, or say that this was history. And we just keep talking to each other, about this in the community, the adults in the churches and the leaders, the community leaders that are here. We just have to keep spreading the message and we'll get louder and louder. So just a big thank you to our families. There's so many different places we can go with this topic. I'm just so thankful for your thoughts and your time, and just being open and vulnerable. It's a very vulnerable place to be, and telling our community what we go through as we called it, Sandra, Black, brown, and blended families. Just a reminder to check out Zora Schwab-Stang's video. I dropped the link to that in the YouTube. She interviewed several folks in Wimberley about past and present, and just about some racial issues and the history of race in Wimberley. I think she did a fantastic job, and I'm in it. Yay.
Come on. And beloved, and so is Jasmine. But I was just going to say, also, just reiterate, thank you very much for all the families coming. And also just to remind you that, the last time we ended our series with a movement phrase, because I am a choreographer after all. And so if you can remember it, it was something like this, because it was about injustice everywhere is a threat to injustice, justice everywhere. And I feel like we could say the same thing to the James Baldwin quote. It's like, you have to decide who you are and force the world to deal with you, not its idea of you. So thank you so much for embodying that with me in this space. And thank you for those that shared their stories. And there's so many excellent suggestions in the chat box. If you want to send any of those to me, you can always do that to the 337sandraos@gmail.com, and as well as the table, yosoi.x.net. And there are going to be links to this conversation. I would encourage you to share these conversations with those that are not at this table. That was the point, is kind of trying to make this an apolitical space, was so that we could get people to come across the aisle of churches, of political organizations, and just talk about this issue in our community. And it's not that we're trying to tear down the community in any way. We just want to acknowledge the racism that's there and has been there, and there's a history of it, and not to be in this kind of state of denial about our little bit of heaven here that is definitely has the impression to some populations of people as being a sunset town or a sundown town in the past, and also a place where only white people come and settle and go to school here. And I feel like there were a lot of really great suggestions on how we can make our community a better place. And I want to keep us thinking about those and asking those questions at the end of every conversation to see how we can move forward with these discussions into whatever that is, if that's going to be policies, but initially it's going to just start with conversations. So thanks for coming to this space, and thank you for all my speakers. And I also want to just do a shout out to Jonathan Banbury, who was here, a pastor. She shares a really poignant story about her sons growing up in San Marcos that you can go check out on our website as well. And her vigilant as a parent. I mean, I think it's a great metaphor for this whole discussion of her standing by the bus, watching that bus driver who was kind of being discriminatory toward her sons. And so, sometimes you have to stand in the gap and just stare it down. And so I just encourage you all to do that. And if you are a witness to anything that you think is not right, or you just don't got a right feeling about it, stop, take your pulse, and step up and say something. So thank you so much for coming. I want to thank my husband for providing his internet expertise and support. And I look forward to seeing you all the next time. We focus more on the Latinx experience in our community. So keep sending people and situations to us that could be used and as stories to illustrate those members of our community as well. Thank you so much.